So the next thing we want to discuss now is the stages of product development, right? Remember that the last thing we spoke about was product life cycle. So it is important not to confuse the two of them. Product development stages is different from product life cycle. So what product development stages basically mean is that what are the touch points that your product will have to, meet before going to launch, right? Not launch as in food, launch as in push into production, right? So the first stage is ideas, right? Ideation. That's the very first stage. Everything stems from an idea, and this idea can come from different places. So it can come from business, from sales, from insight, from customer success, from tweets, right? You see people say they want this feature on their WhatsApp, they just make a tweet about it, and then 2-3 months after, WhatsApp has that feature, right? So um, ideas can stem from anywhere, but the most important thing is validation of ideas, right? So when you have an idea, you need to validate it with the business team, with design, with development to make sure that this thing is feasible, there's a budget for it, the context is, okay, right? There's a good context for it, right? So you want to make sure that your idea is foolproof before you then, run with it, right? Foolproof doesn't mean that there are sometimes that you're not sure whether the idea is going to fly. But again, understanding context. If the idea is coming from sales, you want to know whether it is that sales also wants to use that feature to close a deal, right? Or maybe it is actually a pain point in the market, and then you can scale with it. You want to understand what your goal as a business for the year is before you then proceed to work on the future, right? Now, the next thing I will mention is design and documentation. Documentation and sign off. So this is where your PRDs, your FRDs, your MVP definition documents, and all of that come into play, right? And another thing you do here is that you make sure that stakeholders sign off on it. They give you go ahead to go and work on that feature, right? Remember that you must have defined your success metrics, your future priority level, and all of that in your PRD, right? So you give them a full context and you get them to sign off. A lot of product managers fall into this trap where they just get words of mouth and then proceed to work on a feature. I would recommend that, whether an email trail or a Slack message, make sure that someone signs off, someone superior signs off. If there's anyone superior, right? Someone superior signs off on that. Because personally, when I was just starting out, I found myself in a situation where I worked on a feature, right? And then months after, I was hearing, oh, we were not supposed to work on this and all. Interestingly, I got the word of mouth from the founder, right? But maybe he wasn't even listening to me the day we were having the discussion, right? And again, it was my blame, right? Oh, you're a PM and blah blah blah, right? So since that time, since like 2 years, 3 years ago, I make sure that at every point in time I get sign off. So just to reiterate, ideation and validation of the ideas, documentation and sign off. So the next stage now is design. However, one mistake that people make, product managers and businesses make, is that at the point of design, right? You give design your documents, you give them user stories, you have them cook up, right? Do their magic, come up with something usable, right? Because they're in charge of usability. So at this point, people don't usually bring in the engineers, right? So my advice to you is that always bring your engineers early so that you know whether what you're designing is even technically feasible, right? Hold meetings, make sure that you keep them in loop. Before someone goes to design something and then the back-end guy is coming to say, oh, this is not achievable, we cannot do it based on the framework we are using, right? So make sure you bring them in early. So after design, the next thing you do is development. Now, at this stage, this is where you break down your designs into chunks, assign it to your team members. Everybody claims to be agile these days, but whatever methodology you are using to get work done, just make sure that it is being developed. That's the goal, right? So give it to developers for them to, develop the product. Now, the next step will then be testing, right? So they've developed this is not enough. You have to subject your product to rigorous testing, like rigorous testing. If so, typically, and I would advise that if you're working somewhere that they don't have, make sure that they do, right? There should be a test environment where all the development goes to first for you to test before you then deploy to customers, right? So I've actually worked with a business that had three environments. So they had developed, they had staging, and then production, right? So all everything that boils down to, and that doesn't even mean that they still don't push bugs to production sometimes, right? But what I'm saying is, you want to make sure that your product is properly tested, rigorously tested, right? That's one thing you should work on. So ideation and validation, documentation and sign off, design, right? Then development, then testing. So the next thing is not compulsory, especially if there are no bugs. But if there are bugs or there are some things that you notice, make sure that the developers goes back, right, to fix whatever issues that you found out or the QA team finds out. However, just something to add is that even if there is a standard QA team, I believe that every product manager should still test. It's your product eventually, the success of it is your success, the failure of it is your failure, right? So you should still test your product, right? So after pushing it back for fixes, then the next thing is launch, right? However, at launch, you need to have set up certain procedures, certain structures for you to be able to monitor your success metrics, right? So maybe you said you want to have 5,000 sign-ups. Make sure that there's a way for you to measure that, right? So after launch, another thing that you're then going to do, well, in the period preceding launch, make sure that your materials are ready. So materials as in handoff documents, demo videos, guides, APIs if necessary, and all of that. All of those goes into your launch. Then the next thing you then want to do after launch is monitor key metrics. Make sure that you're measuring success. Measurement is very, very key, right? You want to know how your product is performing, right, from time to time. Then the next thing is then optimization. So you don't just work on a feature and leave it like that. Make sure that you get feedback, especially from the customer success team. Check through Twitter once in a while, check through Facebook, what are people saying about my product, right? And then, use that to determine whether you want to improve on it, whether you want to leave it like that, or whether you want to shelve it. So again, design, ideation and validation, documentation and sign off, design, development, testing, implementation of feedbacks, launch, monitoring key metrics, and then optimization are the stages of product development or feature development. Thank you.